Yeah, we come to the next session, the second panel that will be looking at approaches to financing and how we can streamline the procurement process in the electricity sector. So I'll go straight to invite the panelists. So luckily for them, we will not be asking them to assume ministerial roles. And so we'll just run straight into it. So we'll go straight into the questions. Then once I direct the question to you, you'll take that opportunity to just introduce yourself and then respond to the question. And we go straight to our beloved Daktari, Dr. Mutua. A lot of investors and the project developers cite unpredictability as a major bottleneck with regard to procurement processes when it comes to project procurement. Now, maybe to understand from you, what are the steps that the regulator has taken or has put in place, measures put in place to maybe provide clearer timelines and expectations, and also just give more clarity on the procurement process from the moment the tender is initiated all the way to when we achieve signing.
So thank you very much, Chair, for that question. My name is John Mutua from EPRA, the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority of Kenya. And I'm honored to be here because, of course, part of the work I do also is to talk to stakeholders and also to understand what is happening in our markets. EPRA is responsible for technical and economic regulation of the energy sectors, that is electricity, petroleum and gas, and all the sectors that power the country through energy. So the issue you have raised about the environment, of course, I would have wished for some of those issues are Ministry of Energy related when it comes to also setting the stage for procurement. But as a regulator, of course, we work with the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum and also the National Treasury and other agencies of government, including the Attorney General, to ensure that we understand the environment of doing business in the country. And basically, of course, although it could be seen, we do have some bottlenecks in terms of antiquates of the frameworks that exist and the policies that do exist. As a regulator, we have been able to ensure that we have an Energy Act. Of course, that is a responsibility, again, of the Minister of Energy to ensure that we have an Energy Act. So we have a robust Energy Act 2019 right now that is operating well. And again, when you look at the Act, it comes also with the regulations. So we have also been able to develop our regulations and also come up with the tariff guidelines to basically stimulate the procurement processes and ensure that everything is working well. I wouldn't say we are perfect where we are at the moment, but when you look at the Energy Act, the timelines are very clear. The framework provides for 60 days, for example. By the time you submit a power purchase agreement for approval, or maybe a transmission service agreement, by law, we are required to approve that within 60 days. Our average is actually 41 days. So we have been doing far much better than what the law requires. And of course, because as a regulator, we are also operating within the regional environment with what we call the East African Power Pool market, working with other regulators. We are ensuring that the bottlenecks that have, because sometimes could also be perception that do exist, they are also eliminated. In addition to even focusing with the other institutions, because in Kenya we do have the executive that implements projects, we have judiciary that is on compliance, and also we have the parliament that legislates the law. So we work together with all these organizations to ensure that the environment of doing business is good, and we are working towards ensuring that we have efficiency in all these things. Thank you.
Thank you, Daktari. And maybe just to dwell around that, we've recently in our market we've had a lot of, or rather, it's been a hot debate around transparency in the power project space, around contracts and everything. We've had a lot of talk of high cost of electricity and that being attributed to lack of transparency. And we've seen one of the measures or one of the solutions that have that has been put across and is work in progress currently is around energy auctions. And maybe just to understand that from you, because we understand energy auctions, one of the goals is to lower electricity costs by making the whole process competitive, but at the same time, just enhancing that transparency. Maybe you could elaborate on the key design principles of the auction system, and specifically, how does the auction system seek to attain a balance between low tariff and project bankability or project deliverability?
Okay, thank you. In order to ensure that we have a robust energy auction, you need to have a policy first of all. You need to have to ensure that you have a clear renewable energy or maybe procurement that ensures that the auction process will succeed. Of course, the Minister of Energy has been able to work on the policy. There is a policy that is maybe I do hope they will be able to release it the soonest to the market. And with it, also there are procurement guidelines that have to be aligned to that policy, so that then there is transparency and there is accountability in the way we are running the process. But basically, what I could add is that first of all, you have to ensure that you align your planning with what the country requires. You understand your demand, and also you look at the supply side. Following the various initiatives within the ministry and also within ourselves, we have sort of designated wind and solar to be part of the auction process. Small hydros and biomass projects, they will still continue maybe to be done at the traditional feed-in tariff. But why wind and solar is because technology costs have also come down. We have seen a lot of innovations, and we want to see these innovations that are happening in the market also compete also at the marketplace in our country, and we determine a tariff that is as the right signals, given the risk profile of our country, given the financial availability, where the money is coming from, also the deepening of our capital markets as well. So we have that policy again, and I see my sister from the PPP director is also here. The PPP Act also has provided for competitive bidding within the PPP Act. So the law, the Renewable Energy Auction Policy is informed by what the PPP Act requires, and also what the Energy Act also talks about. But basically, once the way it works is that once you are run before you run an auction, you have to determine the capacity that is going to be auctioned, and after that, of course, bidding is going to be done in a competitive manner to get the value for money for what you are looking at. And then after that, of course, the other process is to sign PPS with the off-taker, for now KPLC. And after KPLC has negotiated what was determined in the market, then submissions to, again, PPP will also be informed, because whenever you are requiring a government letter of support, you cannot afford to leave the national treasury behind. And that note is taken care of by the PPP directorate at the moment. So we are working together to ensure that we streamline, and of course, when it comes to after April approval is when now you go to get the letter of support from government. That is the government support measures, and then you attain financial close, and now the commissioning happens, and of course it becomes a project. So it is not very different from the process implementation is not very different from what we have been doing right now, but it's only like at the entry level there is more competitive procurement. You are subjecting the process of identifying the power plant to the market, but the other processes sort of they just follow the various PPA approval processes. In terms of bankability, the issue is to ensure that we also get serious people coming for the auction, because you may run an auction, and you have seen it in other countries. You get a very lower tariff, and then you find that even those people are not able to develop those projects, because people are just excited to participate in tenders. but maybe they don't have the technical capability and also financial capability to undertake some of these projects. So unless they get somebody to buy it, or which will be a bit difficult because your competitors are already out there, you'll find that what is required is to ensure that we have performance bonds, which you subject to these people who are coming, so that you don't get people also joking around with your processes and you end up not getting energy that you are looking for. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I want to move to Guy, still dwelling on the competitive auctions. Maybe from your perspective and experience, what are some of the inherent risks with our competitive auction system? What are some of the things that probably a developer will need to think about, and probably even the regulator themselves, based on your experience probably in other markets, now that it's something new that we are getting into, but there are potentially many other risks that we could face. One have been alluded to, probably you don't have the right participants in the process. Maybe there could be others. Just share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Job. So I'm Guy Dixon, Vice President at Osprey Renewables, which is a Nairobi-based energy investor. So we're shareholders in Lake Turkana, and then also look at other investments across the region as well. I think Dr. Mutua has set it up perfectly in terms of what an auction should be aiming for. And to me, for Kenya, it's one thing, and that's deliverability. There is no point running an auction where someone comes out with 4 cents. It makes the MPs happy. It makes the headlines happy in the Daily Nation when the auction results are published, and then nothing actually happens because we'll run into load shedding, and we've already spoken about the possible economic impact that would have over the kind of the case that we have of maybe your power costs 1 cent more or 1 shilling more when it reaches the consumer. So I think the key thing really is deliverability. And when we talk about deliverability, as a developer and an investor, we're really looking for certainty in terms of what the process looks like, what the objectives are, and what the terms are that we're going to be competing on. So the process is timelines. So having really clear timeline of this is how long we're going to develop for, this is when our bids need to be submitted by, this is how long the appraisal period is going to be, this is how long the construction period is going to be, and this is how long the PPA is then going to be. The next is then the objectives. What is the purpose of this? And Dr. Mutua touched on auctions being relevant for wind, solar, maybe not hydro, geothermal, nuclear was mentioned earlier, coal, dare I say it. Not that I think we'll have auctions for coal anytime soon, but the key thing is what's the objective? And is it bringing power on the grid? Is it bringing power on the grid in specific places? And that also starts to answer the question of BESS and the role of BESS. So is it an IPP's responsibility to bring on a certain quality of power, an ability to perform arbitrage or voltage control or frequency control? All of those definitions need to be set out up front so that I, as a developer, as an investor, know what I'm preparing a project for. And then finally, the terms. And I think the challenge that we run into at the moment in Kenya, or could potentially run into, is everyone realizes that there's a need for power. So we're desperate to sign PPAs. But if we sign one PPA with one project where we say yes to something and no to something else, and then we sign another PPA with another project, and those terms change, it becomes very hard for lenders, for investors to get comfortable with the market because things are constantly changing. If we can come up with standard kind of boilerplate PPAs, and they will be different for a hydro project to a wind project to a geothermal project, but as much as we can standardize that and get people happy with those terms and make sure that they're bankable from the outset, it first of all, it avoids people turning around at late stages of projects and saying, actually, we need to cancel this project because we can't get happy. But secondly, then it allows us to really get competitive on prices. The time to get competitive on a price is not the first round of an auction. It's the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth round of an auction. The first round of an auction is there to get investors, developers happy with how the market is going to work and provide confidence. And from that, then success will come later. So I think I'll stop there. very established panel who know better than I do on many of the points. So yeah, hopefully that helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Guy. And I'll move right to Florian, just to give any additional thoughts around auctions, but specifically comment on how would or what are your views around scoring mechanism for an auction system? Would you propose to have some non-price factors like local content requirements, ESG compliance, and all that to be part of the scoring mechanism for an auction system?
Sure. Thanks. So my name is Florian Cammas. I'm a director at FINERGREEN. We're a financial advisory and investment bank boutique, basically raising capital for power projects for power company, and also negotiating a number of PPAs around all the commercial bankability and financial aspects, usually on the IPP side, but we've also been on government side in front of IPPs, helping them to negotiate PPPs. So quite on point on this, and also on helping people to bid on large auction systems like the South African one, for example. I would say, and trying not to repeat what's been said before, overall, the essential for an auction to be successful is that the rules of the games are very clear for everyone, that they don't change across the process, and also that the base case is something realistic that is achievable for the IPPs, for the bidders. So basically, that you propose something that is bankable, that can fly, and that you don't put requirements that are going to have a drastic cost on the bidders. And typically, coming to your question, so about local content, ESG requirements, I think, well, eventually you do want to have some of that money staying in the country. And yes, local content, I think on the long run is essential on those deals, etc. But you also don't want to put a requirement that means that basically it's going to cost double to build the power plant. And I think we've seen that in some auction process, which have been unsuccessful, obviously, that there is an expectation of, 60% local content on a PV plant. Well, there is no module manufacturing capacity right now in Kenya, for example. China has a market completely. If you do that, you kill your auction process. So I would say rather than two things, one, it needs to be really realistic and based on something that can be bankable and cost effective for bidders. And two, it needs to be bankable as well. Thank you.
Before I go back to Dr. Mutua, Guy, I'm back to you. We know that winning a tender is just one part of the process. Then the next process, there is a whole chain of approvals and permitting that needs to be done for a typical power project. Now, in your opinion, from the projects you've developed and maybe in the Kenyan context, what seems to be the most time-consuming process in that gap between winning a tender all the way to execution and probably financial close?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll look at Florence and Mphokolo as well through answering this question. I think it goes back to the rules of the game. I think that's a very good way to term it that Florian used. And I think one thing maybe jumps out immediately asking that question, which is land and local community or local involvement. I think very quickly in an auction scenario, you could run into a solution or a situation where projects are being defined by their relationships with the local community or their ability to execute on the land that they are targeting. And it may be land that is already secured. It may be land where the communities have been identified. And it may be land where there's already active negotiations or an existing project in place. But whilst that remains unclear in terms of that full regularization process, the value of putting a transmission line through someone's land and the wayleave process, as long as that remains kind of unclear or uncertain and different between projects, that opens up a significant amount of uncertainty. If you're looking at kind of ESIA, that it's fairly well charted in terms of if you have a certain type of bird or bat or water source issue, like there are global examples to go to that. Community is really kind of specific to the local area, and those conversations need to be had really carefully. We've seen in Kenya what happens with 𝐾𝐢𝐴, and if we look at the two wind farms, which I know well, of 𝐬𝐭𝐫 and 𝐬𝐿𝐴, they've both got very complex land stories as well. So I think when we look at auctions and when we look at going forwards, the more we can define that across the country, the more it moves out some of the subjectivity that then can take projects a very long time to go through. But yeah, Florence and Mphokolo's lenders and developers will probably be able to answer that very well as well.
Yeah, probably Florence can make a comment on that, and then Mphokolo.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, Mr. John. My name is Florence, Florence Wambugu. I'm in the energy and infrastructure space. I've been in development for a while now. I'm developing projects in the continent, from utility scale gas to power. Even doing advisory roles for transmission lines. If I could just start at the transmission lines, if we look at how the projects are done, and I think the acting CEO of 𝐾TRAC alluded to all of this, where he said that it's important even to have local consultants, because even items along relief acquisitions, ESIA, even to understand how the people are and what kind of solutions we are giving, even the stakeholder meetings, it would be important to have the locals. So when we start up on projects and we have timelines, yet they're not followed because of maybe no proper feasibility study, it puts up the cost of this kind of projects. And that in itself causes a delay. And we should stop looking at like procurement and finance separately. They should go hand in hand, because a delay in the project always attracts extra costs, even the viability of the project, the bankability.
Thank you. My name is Mphokolo Makara. I work for Standard Bank. So looking at the commercial bank aspect of financing, and really just to add to the conversation, I think what has been highlighted across the panel is just the time it takes to develop, and that comes with time value of money and cost. Where we sit as a commercial bank is to make sure that we comply with local laws, and Kenya's instance that would be NIMA, as well as how we as financial institutions are audited and regulated in terms of our commitments to environmental and social governance. And typically that would also be things like equator principles, IFC performance standards. So it's really looking at how a particular project and a developer has complied with those, to the sense that it also complies with the project's plan in terms of what has been done through the development process, what needs to be done during the construction period, and where that has not been achieved, what will continue to be monitored during the operations and maintenance period. So really it's just to ensure that the regulations are complied with. And again, from an investor perspective, from a sponsor perspective, developer perspective, that comes at a cost. And typically where you find that that process takes a bit longer, at the financial close process, your developer would want to get a development premium or recover their development costs. So if we cannot find a middle ground in terms of what has been spent in terms of money out the door, as well as what premium they would like to receive for the work done to date, it really then begins to affect the financial model, then going back to affordability and tariff. So it's really just about time value of money and what the relative cost would be in terms of how long it's taken a project to get to financial close, and what then the ultimate impact of that delayed implementation is on the tariff and affordability ultimately to end users.
Thank you, Mphokolo. Just to dwell on the financing bit. Yeah, and you demonstrated, you've highlighted what delays mean from a financing perspective. And maybe you can delve into that a bit deeper. But while on that, the other thing is probably to get your views on how has the Kenyan power project landscape changed over probably the past few years. Probably over a decade or so. We've had moratoriums, we've had a lot of project developments being stalled or impacted. How has this translated, or how has this been how do I put it? How has this come about on the financing side? So what impact has it had for probably the projects that had already begun engagement with potential financiers or capital providers, and how have the projects been impacted? I know we are going back to the moratorium has been lifted, and so we may end up having another discussion. But in the past, how has this looked like for Kenya specifically?
And I think the previous panel has highlighted what the opportunity looks like for Kenya. The numbers which have been mentioned either range from 5 gigawatts from the existing just over 3 gigawatts in terms of the long-term generation capacity requirements to 100 gigawatts. And any investor would look at that opportunity as the market scale and size. But in the absence of an ongoing procurement program, investors move on. That's just the reality. From a financing perspective, of course, we respond to the market in terms of where investors and developers see the opportunity, what their financing strategy is, and how we as a commercial bank can come in to facilitate that. The longer, I guess, development takes in a market, you've mentioned the moratorium period over 7 years, it comes at a risk premium. It comes at a cost that ends up affecting one, investor appetite. And then if you want to then achieve price discovery in the form of an auction process, if you don't have enough data points in terms of projects coming on stream, it becomes difficult to understand whether 7 cents, 4 cents is realistic. And then the comparison will then be, how does that compare to another market? A market that we've seen as an institution being quite competitive is Egypt. But Egypt has continued to receive a lot of government support in terms of security packages, but also in terms of creating a procurement process that's sizable enough from a scale perspective, but that also has continuity. So I think the start and stop in terms of what we've observed in the Kenya market has certainly limited price discovery, and it will also then impact the auction process and what the tariff outcome of that will be, because you don't have enough data points to give you a sense of what a realistic tariff is in terms of what the government and regulators require and what the actual market response will be, purely because there hasn't been continuity in terms of procurement, but also not enough scale to be able to take a view across the value chain. But in developed markets where you've got a sizable procurement program, you find that investors begin to take a view between equity returns and O&M returns over time. You can take that risk, that blended risk over time if you've got continuity. But if you don't have that visibility of continuity, it also becomes difficult for investors to take that trade-off in terms of where they will seek to optimize their returns, which then, of course, then ultimately impacts the investment strategy and funding strategy. So I think without continuity, the difficulty becomes, you begin to introduce uncertainty, and everybody takes a view on uncertainty in terms of pricing it up, which then, of course, impacts the ultimate tariff. And also, I guess, begins to introduce trade-offs in terms of, if you see continuity in, let's say, the Southern African market on the continent or North Africa, then you make a decision to move away from Kenya and invest there. And just given the timelines involved, to reverse that investment decision also takes a long time to actually then, change investor appetite to come back to a particular market.
Thank you. Let's move back to Florence. So Florence, we know grid infrastructure plays a critical role in the whole ecosystem. And we've had a lot of activity in the transmission space locally and a lot of PPPs. And we are happy to have Engineer Mativo here. He's driven a lot of that. The question is, how can Kenya get the best value out of the PPP process that is currently ongoing on the transmission side, so that we remain in line with our current expectations and also aligned to the reforms that we are looking at? And at the back of my mind, I'm thinking what was mentioned earlier, that if we are not careful, we could end up on the transmission side, we could end up in the same issues and challenges that we've had with the IPPs. How do we approach this process so that we avoid all that?
Thank you very much, Job. Maybe just to start off that, I think Kenya has advanced very well in terms of the generation, especially in regard to solar and wind, and geothermal. Now, so what becomes our pain point at this point? We've generated, but we are not able to evacuate the power. Previously, we've had a lot of DFIs funding all of this. So what is happening now, there's a finance gap when it comes to PPPs, to the transmission lines. And that's why we are looking towards PPPs. And even as we look at transmission lines as having the vehicle as a PPP, we should have the PPP lens in that not all of them should be going through the PPP. So what are we saying now? So we need to prioritize the ones that would be under the PPP, and we would need to do value for money even when we are developing this PPP, these transmission lines. What we are looking for is to have low power costs, to secure affordable financing. And at that point, we come up with efficiency, innovation, and risk mitigations during that point. So another point that I would put across is maybe on preparation prior to the invitation, such that we can have proper feasibility studies, that we have bankable solutions. We have moved away from just putting things out there and stopping at the pre-feasibility stage, because that in itself will invite a lot of variations. There'll be a lot of issues that come up. Again, we alluded about the way leaves, the SCRs that need to get done before we start. So what are we saying? We need to have proper preparation for all of that. We need to have smart contracting. We have in place a PPP regulatory. We need to move away from bespoke contracts and have standard templates on all of this, such that even there are no delays during the contracting. We are also looking for competitive bidding, where we are saying that we're not just going to the lowest person. I think Guy alluded to getting some low costs, and at the award, we cannot move on with the work. So maybe apply quality cost-based selection, such that we are looking at the entire delivery of the project, and we're not just looking at the lowest, even if we are hoping to have low power. And I think the third item is on financing, which will ultimately play a role on the tariff, and the use of blended finance, and then crowdfunding for public funds that would reduce the equity, and it would be a bit more bankable if we take into consideration all these items.
Thank you, Flo. Back to Dr. Mutua. Currently, procurement falls, the procurement process involves a number of institutions that, for lack of a better way of putting it, it seems like they work independently, all of them, but towards one goal. So we have least cost planning, we have grid studies, we have tariff approvals, we have licensing, let's say the generation licensing, we have environmental licensing. So in the past, we've had discussions to set up a one-stop IPP shop where every project that is going through the tender process will be serviced through. So one does not have to go here and go there and anywhere else, and they have all their problems solved at one stop. Now, is there a move towards greater institutional coordination to just help streamline the procurement process? And how, and if there isn't, what plans are in place to help us get there? I think one of the challenges probably some developers in the room will speak to is around getting one approval, going to another office, something is not right, you have to go back, you have to probably redo a study, you have to do some realignments before you actually have all your package approved. So what's going on in that space?
Okay, thank you. That is a difficult question to ask me. But one, of course, we have many players who are involved in the approval of projects in this country. But also we have Kenya Invest. You know, Kenya Invest is mandated to ensure that they put in place information to prospective investors who are looking for business in Kenya, to have clarity on the various protocols, the various guidelines for investment. So first of all, what we have done working with Kenya Invest is to ensure that we give our steps, all approval steps for project approvals also to Kenya Invest. Secondly, we have been working with, when you look at energy regulator, EPRA, I look at the National Treasury and the Minister of Energy. The work is also heavy. And the other part is the Attorney General, because again, legal opinion has to be provided for before a letter of support is issued. So even if we separate, we have one stop where issues can be sorted. It cannot be like you can be sorted from one office, but I think the most important thing is to consolidate and have the guidelines very clear so that it is very open on the various steps you need to ensure you undertake before you get a project done. Because again, laws, there has to be separation in law to avoid conflicts of interest. Because, for example, for me as a regulator, I don't think the same way as the Minister of Energy. Minister of Energy is policy, they provide policy guidance. As a regulator, I'll look at the approval process and be different from the ministry. But at the end of the day, we are aligned, because you don't want to act like the policy maker to identify projects and also run and influence procurement. And then you are the same guy who is coming to approve a PPA. So that separation has to be clear for everybody. But what we have done, for example, even as the moratorium of PPAs has now been lifted, you will find even when the National Assembly was looking at the issues, they wanted the investment matters, whether it is generation, whether it's transmission, to be clear. I mean, they also struggled with some of the issues to understand some of the issues. But I think just like everybody else, we want an environment that is very streamlined and that is very transparent and accountable. So as a regulator, what we are working with the other agencies is, for example, we have a PPA procurement review process that we have. So we ensure that in our guidelines, we know when to talk to the PPP, we know when to talk to the ministry, we know when to go to the SG, and we advise all these investors. Now, when we come to the going forward, because it has been a learning curve for us, even as a country, as we move now to the next phase, where I think we are going to have a lot of generation projects being done, and also we are seeing a lot of ITPs, the independent transmission projects also being developed, is just setting the agenda right, identify the projects to be done, and the processes on how they are going to be done, and we make it very, very clear for us. We'll be publishing some of these guidelines even in our websites, and maybe the PPP Directorate and KPLC, and as well the ministry, so that it is very, very clear to all of us. We did attempt, for example, when one of the guys I see as an investor here, I think Bernard, he's now in investment. When Bernard we used to work together, we developed a renewable energy portal, which was one-stop shop, where it still runs, where investors can go to that portal within EPRA, and they can see all the requirements on which officers they need to get NEMA approval, approval for government letters of support, and all that. So I think we are going to do something like that, and I see a better and a transparent electricity sector as we move forward, more competitive and more resources, more investors coming to our country.
Thank you, Dr. So I'm reminded we are running out of time, so I'll pose the last two questions, one to Florian, the other to Guy. So Florian, from your experience, what are some of the solutions that you think Kenya can consider just to lower the capital costs for the projects that they are undertaking, and also to increase speed of delivery, because a lot of it has to do with the whole procurement process?
Okay, no, thanks for this. And I think I'll kind of pick up where Mphokolo left it, which is, I think the best way, step one is you need a bankable, realistic framework on what you're putting on the table in terms of PPA, bankability, etc. for the deal. Step two, repeat deals. How do you get costs down through repeat deals? The first deals, people don't know exactly how it's going to go, how bankable the PPA is 𝐬𝐭𝐫 really going to pay, etc., etc. The more, and then if you keep the same framework and you do more deals, 𝐬𝐭𝐫 has proven that they're paying, etc., then we can actually put pressure on the lenders, etc., to compete more, bring more lenders to the table, lower the cost, and then lower the tariffs. In that order. You cannot first expect the tariff to be as low as the most competitive countries because you've heard the figure somewhere. So you say, this is what I expect. And if I don't get this, well, basically, I'm not going to sign this deal. I'm not going to do it. First, you need to do, the reality is the tariff, that is a realistic tariff in the country is the one that potential IPPs will propose to you. If no one wants to do it at this price, it means this is not realistic. So you have to start with, this is what the market can give. Then you need to improve the conditions and do repeat deals so that you can make people compete more and lower costs. And that's on the financing, but that's also on EPC, which is essential in terms of the tariff setting. You repeat the deals. You have EPCs who have track record in the country. They know how it goes. They will lower their margin. You will bring more contractors to the country. They will compete. But if you want to create competition, you need to have transparency, visibility, and you need to repeat. And so coming back to the auction, I think we saw, a gazettement on the auction policy plan, etc. 3 years ago, I believe, 3-4 years ago. The most expensive auction is the one that doesn't happen. So I think it's time that even if it's a small one at first, some things are actually launched and start happening as a trial to learn from it and then scale it. But the more you wait, the more it's going to be expensive.
Thank you, Florian. So on to Guy. There's a mandatory push to have BESS integrated into upcoming renewable projects and more so for the VREs. From a developer standpoint, how can you navigate financing to meet the high upfront costs for BESS while retaining project bankability, but at the same time remaining competitive with regard to tariffs?
I think it's a really interesting question, and I mentioned BESS earlier when talking about auction policy. I don't want to put Dr. Mutua on the spot, but I know one of the PPA moratorium lifting conditions was that EPRA announce a BESS tariff and determine what that tariff is for ancillary services. Now, Dr. Mutua, you don't have to answer this because it's unfair of me, but I think that fundamentally then gives an answer to your question, Job. It depends what the BESS is doing. Will there be a expectation for IPPs to develop with BESS? And there is a 7 cents, 7.5 cents, whatever the tariff may be for your wind project, and a 1.5 cent tariff on top for the provision of batteries and whatever services they might be providing? Or will there be a tariff for capacity factors of batteries and making sure that you constantly have a 2-hour reserve that can suddenly enter the grid from a spinning reserve perspective? There's tons of variations of that, and I'm not a battery kind of complete expert in terms of the technical capabilities of them, but fundamentally without an answer to what the tariff looks like and how that has a relationship to IPPs, it's very hard to answer from a developer's perspective. And finally, before maybe Dr. Mutua, let you respond, is I think we still haven't fully answered the question as a Kenyan energy sector. Should IPPs be born with the responsibility of batteries? Because I think there's a very strong argument for batteries being focused at, whether it's Suswa or whether it's in Western, at key grid nodes where actually the grid is currently weakest or the instabilities are felt the hardest. And I think placing batteries there, putting an individual battery tariff on for the specific services could be a lot more beneficial and fundamentally cost effective to the Kenyan grid as well. So those are just my thoughts, but I'll let Dr. Mutua respond to my unfair questions.
Probably in a follow-up session if we have one. But thank you all. On to the audience. I'm only going to give 2 chances for questions because I keep on getting repeated reminders that we are out of time. So if you are having gray hair because of the development process in Kenya, now is your chance. Yes, one from Engineer Mativo. Any other? Perfect. We'll take that one.
Okay, mine is just to set the scene and say there's urgency for us to streamline the whole procurement process and have a list of projects that need to get undertaken within time. Let me just give an example. If you're not careful, in 2 years from now, how is the grid going to look like? Let me start with Tanzania. Tanzania right now, you know Julius Nyerere, they have done the 2,100. They had a transmission line 400 kV from the dam all the way to Chanzile. Now they're building from Chanzile to Dodoma 400 kV double circuit. So very soon, you know, Dodoma is connected all the way to Arusha. So Kenya will be connected directly to Julius Nyerere. And earlier somebody mentioned, you remember Tanzania, their system already have the automated generation control system. So actually, as we speak today, Tanzanians will sense any fault in Kenya before the Kenyan system senses that. Then let me look at what 𝐾𝐢𝐴𝐚𝐥𝐸 and MD said, Dr. MD. They're doing the StartComs and other projects. So very soon, there'll be ability to bring 2,000 plus megawatts from Ethiopia. Ethiopia very well, I'm sure you're aware. They're doing their dam that is just on Omo River, the Kosha dam, almost at 2,000 megawatts. And by the way, I think there was a confusion in the morning. When you talk about subsidy of tariffs in Ethiopia, it is to domestic tariffs. When they sell to us at 6 US cents or so, it is not subsidized. So I think there's a small confusion that was created. My point is this, that if we do not have a streamlined process within Kenya, and we don't have rolling out projects, knowing what is going to happen, December 2027, 2 years from now, when we have another Baraza, we'll be actually talking about that we have available 1,000 megawatts from Tanzania. We have 2,000 megawatts available from Ethiopia. And we'll make sure what will happen is that our delays in terms of making decision and starting the procurement process and having this process going forth will be dependent on actually our foreign neighbors, almost 25% plus in terms of power that is coming to Kenya. So that's what I just say. Mention is good. I understand. I really enjoy it. But urgency, when do we start seeing these power plants within this group that been procured and available? So Dr. Mutua and the rest of the team, I think when somebody had mentioned the issue of having that long lead time, long term of projects, I thought it's something that is extremely urgent. We need to make this decision. Policies, it has to be made right now that we need to bring more and more power plants on board, and this has to be made almost now. Thank you.
Thank you. So we need to move with speed. Many thanks to this panel. And I know we were squeezed of time. You have much more to share. So if you feel like you need to engage, here they are. Thank you.